Good morning and welcome back to Next Level Ed Leadership Interview Prep. Have you ever finished a superintendent interview response or finished up a practice session and thought, okay, I answered the question? You described the challenge, explained the decision, shared the outcome, and you even felt pretty confident about it. But then you started wondering, was that enough? What if the board wasn't simply listening for the solution? What if they were listening for something your response never revealed? As I continued analyzing superintendent interview data, I noticed something else. The strongest finalists consistently continued their responses, long after most candidates believed the interview question had already been answered. That led to today's research observation. Most superintendent candidates prepare for interview questions. School boards are evaluating something else. I'm Jonathan Royce. Through executive interview intelligence, each episode explores the leadership signals, decision-making patterns, and executive behaviors that influence superintendent hiring decisions, so you can make your executive leadership visible before the board makes its hiring decision. Recognized as one of the top 10 K-12 podcasts on Podomatic, Executive Interview Intelligence is built on the analysis of real superintendent interviews to uncover the hidden executive evaluations taking place throughout the hiring process. We've analyzed more than 150 superintendent interview questions and candidate responses, broken them down into their component parts, and created practical tools that save you time, reduce anxiety, and provide a systematic way to prepare for superintendent interviews. That way you can focus on leveling up, accelerate your professional trajectory, and prepare for a future where you're leading a district and improving students' lives. This is Executive Interview Intelligence Research Observation number 80. As I continued analyzing superintendent interview data, one interview question kept pulling my attention back. It wasn't because it was particularly difficult or easy, but because of what it revealed about how school boards evaluate executive leaders. A superintendent search committee asked finalists this question. Describe a time when feedback from family, staff, or community members caused you to rethink your initial approach to an issue. How did you communicate your decision, and what did the experience teach you about leadership? Think about that question for a moment. The first part makes sense. Describe a time. Most superintendents know how to respond to that. Then the board asks, how did you communicate your decision? Again, it seems fairly straightforward. But then something changes. The committee asks, what did the experience teach you about leadership? Why ask that? The board already knows what happened. They already know the decision you made. They already know how you communicated it. Why isn't that enough? Because I don't think that the board was trying to understand the experience anymore. I think they were trying to understand the executive leader the experience created. The observation became even more interesting as I compared other superintendent interview case studies. Another board asked this. School districts across Massachusetts face significant fiscal challenges. Tell us about your approach to budgeting and resource allocation and share an example of how you have navigated a period of financial constraint. Another asked, how do you balance supporting principals and school leaders with holding them accountable when student outcomes, school climate, or equity goals are not being consistently met? These are different topics from different districts under different circumstances, but the same executive evaluation. None of these boards were simply collecting examples. They were looking for evidence from the candidates, evidence of executive growth and of executive judgment, or evidence that difficult experiences had permanently shaped how the candidate now leads. That changes everything because most superintendent candidates think the goal of an interview response is to explain what they did. The research is suggesting something different. The strongest finalists appear to understand that every leadership experience creates two stories. The first story is what happened. The second story is what changed because it happened. That's the story boards appear to be searching for. Think about your own leadership. If you've negotiated a difficult contract, led through a budget reduction, responded to a crisis, or rebuilt trust after conflict, hopefully you didn't simply solve that one problem. Hopefully, you became a better school leader because of that. School boards know that that's why they ask questions like that. What did the experience teach you about leadership? They're trying to determine whether experience became a learned behavior. If you basically became wiser, or whether it simply became another story. As I continued studying stronger superintendent interview responses, I noticed something else. The strongest finalists rarely finished with the event. Instead, they elevated the conversation. They connected the experience to an executive principle. That they helped the board understand how that experience changed the way they now approach future decisions. That's a completely different ending to that response. Instead of saying, here's what happened, the response continued to naturally evolve into, because of that experience, here's what I learned, and here's how I now lead. You see the difference. The first response explains the past, the second reduces uncertainty about the future. And that's exactly what school boards are trying to do. They're making one of the most important hiring decisions a district will make. They're trying to predict what kind of executive leader you'll become once you're sitting in the superintendent's chair. The decision chain helps explain why this matters. The decision chain doesn't stop with the decision. It continues through reflection, growth, executive learning, and ultimately the leadership principles that will guide the next decision. That's that's where your response becomes much more than an interview response. It becomes evidence of your leadership. And it's evidence that your leadership is evolving because of what you've learned over time. Evidence that you've learned from those bumps and bruises and difficult decisions along the way. And that, for them, is evidence that tomorrow's decision will likely be stronger than yesterday's. And I believe that's why the strongest responses didn't end with the decision. They ended by helping the board understand who they were as an executive leader and what they would do moving forward. That may be one of the most important leadership signals your response can communicate. Most superintendent candidates prepare for interview questions. School boards are evaluating something else. The next time you practice a superintendent interview response, don't stop when you've explained the decision you made. Ask yourself, did I help the board understand how this experience changed me as an executive leader? Because that's what they're trying to discover. Not whether you solved difficult problems, because they know that you have. Every experienced superintendent or principal or central office person has. They're trying to determine whether those experiences shape the way that you currently address situations and solve problems. They want to know how you will now lead and the way that you'll approach the next challenge their district faces. The strongest finalists don't simply describe executive experiences, they reveal executive growth because every difficult decision, every setback, and every success shapes you as a leader. When your response helps the board see that transformation, your experience becomes more than an interview story or interview anecdote. It becomes evidence of your leadership growth. And it shows that your leadership is continuing to evolve. And that's the kind of executive leader school boards are trying to hire. When you get back to your computer or safety pull over, get done with your workout, please visit us at analysis.next-level at leadershipinterviewprep.com. The link is in the description. Record one of your superintendent interview responses and receive your complimentary decision chain analysis. And you'll discover whether your response simply explains what happened or reveals how your executive leadership has evolved because of it, because you already know what you're saying. The real question is, what is the board hearing? If you're finding value in the research, follow the podcast and leave us a 5-star review. It really helps us out. It also helps more educational leaders discover executive interview intelligence and rethink how they prepare for superintendent interviews. Thank you for listening. And remember, most superintendent candidates prepare for interview questions. School boards are evaluating something else.